The guard hissed a command and yanked the leash. The dog leapt, then froze, whining, eyes softening as if remembering an old prayer. Seconds later, they learned who he really was. They had him at the loading dock where the laundry trucks coughed steam into the winter air. A concrete mouth of a place, yellow lines, rusted handrails, a chain-link fence humming with cold. Inmates in gray moved like shadows, faces turned just enough to watch without being seen watching. A new arrival stood at the painted footprint stencil, hands behind his back, posture quiet, eyes on the chipped blue of the Sallyport door. "On your knees," the guard said. His name patch read R. Kepley. He held the leash like a useful secret. At the other end, a sable-coated German shepherd stood square and eager, ears pricked, breath fogging like an engine. The guard didn't whisper. He wanted the echo. "You hear me, inmate? On your knees. Let us see some respect." A few laundry workers slowed. One guard leaned an elbow on a rolling hamper, that bored look officers wear when they're hungry for something to break the day. The new man didn't argue. He lowered himself to the paint like a deacon at prayer. He kept his chin tucked, his voice steady. "No trouble here." Kepley smiled sideways at the audience. "Trouble's what you people bring." He snapped his fingers and the shepherd's body tensed like a drawn bow. "Stark! Voran! Attack!" The dog surged, paws scraping concrete. It reached the man's shoulder and stopped. Not a flinch, not a stall, a halt. Gentle as rain hitting a porch step. The shepherd's head dipped, tail loosened. A small, eager whine unfurled from its chest, nothing like fury. The dog pressed its muzzle to the man's sleeve as if touching home. Silence wrapped the dock. Somewhere a pulley squealed. The man lifted his hand just an inch, palm open, fingers folded the way you'd fold prayer. He didn't touch the dog. He didn't need to. Kepley's grin collapsed. He jerked the leash. "Stark Voran!" The shepherd sat. A trustee muttered, "Lord," under his breath. The new arrival breathed once deep. When he spoke, his voice fit the cold like it belonged there. "Easy, boy." He could have said more. He didn't. He only looked at the dog the way a father looks at a grown son he hasn't seen in years, proud, sad, certain. Around them, the dock was a throat about to swallow. They had no idea who he really was. His name was Earl Whitaker, 63, a retired K-9 trainer who'd worked for 3 counties and half of the departments that once called him Sir. The kind of man who knew the difference between a bark that meant "I'm scared" and a bark that meant "I'm willing." He taught dogs to find children who wandered into cornfields and bombs taped under bleachers. He had an old injury in his left knee that made him set his weight careful, like a carpenter picking a strong beam. He had a habit of listening longer than anyone thought a man cared to. How does a man like that end up here? The short answer, a mistake that wasn't his, and a system that took its time admitting it. A paperwork snarl, a bench warrant stamped wrong, a transport scheduled before the phone call that should have canceled it. Overnight observation, they said, just until the judge signs the correction. A bureaucratic hiccup that, for some men, turns into a storm. Earl didn't panic because men who panic around dogs get bit. And he lived a lifetime staying calm for every creature that could smell fear. He didn't put on courage like a coat. He wore it like skin. When the cuffs came, he said, "Okay." When they took his belt and his watch, he said, "Understood." When they gave him a number stitched over his heart where his name used to be, he felt the stitch like a thorn and said nothing, because thorns remind you which way not to lean. The prison they brought him to wasn't the one from television. It was a city with its own weather, steam curling up from the kitchen vents, pigeons like ash over the rec yard, a chapel that smelled like cheap wood polish, a greenhouse that held heat like a secret. Men traded soups for stamps, stamps for favors, favors for safety. Words ran fast on the tier ladders and slower on the administrative floors, where carpet muted sin and consequence into meetings. Earl had trained 100 dogs, maybe more, but he never forgot certain noses. Stark's nose, for instance. How it twitched when he caught Clover. How his ears went sideways when he was confused. How he loved the tennis ball more than he loved his food. The state bought Stark after a vendor demonstration. Earl spent 6 months turning raw talent into patience. Then the county merged units, budgets were cut, handlers moved, and Earl retired with a cake and a plaque that said words meant to last. He thought he'd see Stark again only in dreams that smelled like leather, winter, and clean fur. Now winter breathed across a loading dock and a leash hummed in a young guard's hand. Earl could feel the dog's memory like a wire he had once tied into a perfect knot. His heart steadied not because he liked danger, but because he could hear the old rhythm: sit, stay, trust. Men forgot. Dogs did not. Authority doesn't take kindly to being questioned, especially not by a man wearing state-issue gray. Kepley's face tightened, the kind of look that says he'd rather break something than back down. The loading dock, still cold and echoing, turned into a stage no one had asked to stand on. The guard's knuckles whitened on the leash. "You trying to show me up, old man?" Earl didn't answer. He kept his eyes low, calm as still water. "The dog's just confused," he said quietly. "You're giving him mixed signals." That calm tone, it made Kepley bristle. "Don't tell me how to handle my own animal." He tugged hard on the leash, more force than needed. Stark stumbled a half step, steadied himself, then sat again, facing Earl. The way a compass points home even when the map's wrong. A few workers nearby exchanged glances. One of them, a young man with a broom, muttered, "That dog knows something." Kepley turned on him. "You got something to say?" The broom froze mid-sweep. Nobody spoke. Kepley turned back to Earl. "You think you're special?" His voice sharpened. "Let's see how long that calm lasts." He stepped forward until the leash went taut. Stark's ears dropped, muscles rigid, not out of fear, but confusion. He looked up at Earl again, whining softly, tail low. Every handler in the place knew what that meant. Loyalty conflicted with orders. "Easy, boy," Earl said softly. "Nobody's asking you for trouble." That voice, low, warm, certain, cut right through the noise. The dog's breathing steadied, his body loosened. He took one hesitant step toward Earl. Kepley froze, caught between pride and panic. "Stay back," he barked. "You hear me, Stark? Stay back." But the dog didn't. He stayed still, calm, listening, unmoved. His eyes didn't leave Earl, as if waiting for a familiar sign that would make the world make sense again. The sergeant arrived just then, clipboard under her arm. "What's going on here?" she asked. "Just teaching this one some manners," Kepley said. "Looks more like the dog's teaching you," one of the workers whispered, earning a glare from him. The sergeant frowned. "Officer Kepley, get this intake finished properly. Move it away from the dock. I don't want a scene." Kepley nodded stiffly. "Yes, ma'am." He jerked the leash again. "Move, Stark." The dog hesitated, then followed, slow, reluctant. Earl was led down a narrow hall lined with barred windows and green-tinted light. Every step echoed off the tile. The air smelled of bleach, iron, and pride. Kepley kept stealing glances at the dog as they walked, jaw tight, muttering under his breath. He didn't understand what had just happened. But everyone watching did. Because even behind concrete walls, something powerful had shifted. A man had stayed calm. A dog had remembered kindness, and the one who thought he owned control was beginning to lose it. They just didn't know yet how far that memory would reach. Earl raised one hand, palm low, not to stop the guard, but to ask the dog for a favor. He didn't shout. He didn't perform. He didn't even speak a word Stark had been taught by the state. He whistled a note that had never been on any handler's list. 2 tones, rising, then a tiny drop. The sound was half lullaby, half kitchen kettle. Stark's head turned so fast the leash sang. His ears made that perfect triangle of attention. His body flowed to heel with a grace that felt like relief. He rested his flank against Earl's calf and sighed, the sigh of a creature who has found the right room at last. The corridor fell still, the kind of still that makes men question memories they were sure about seconds earlier. Earl reached slowly, permission in every movement, and scratched the spot just under Stark's ear where the fur grows in a little swirl. The dog's eyes softened into the old look. "Good boy. Good work. Trusted place." Kepley sputtered. "What did you—" Earl straightened. He looked at the sergeant, not the boy with the leash, because some lessons require grown-ups. "Ma'am," he said to the nurse first, because courtesy is how you open doors. "Sergeant," he nodded. This animal's response is not disobedience, it's recognition. Recognition of what? The sergeant asked, clipboard lowered now, pencil a truce. Of me. He shifted his weight off the knee. I'm Earl Whitaker, 32 years training canines for Mill County, Spencer Township, and the State Cooperative Task Force when they needed me. I helped bring Stark through his noise sensitivity phase. He used to freeze when trucks air braked. We fixed that with patience, not force. Kepley tried a grin that had too many teeth. Anyone can say they trained a dog. Earl didn't argue. He lifted his palm and in a voice that could have been asking a child to set a table, said, Stark, place. There was no place in the state command list, but Stark knew. He moved to the square of rubber matting laid under a greenhouse hose reel and folded into a perfect down, nose on his paws, eyes never leaving Earl's hand. Not once. Not even when Kepley hissed his name. Not when the mop bucket squealed again. Not when a cart rattled by. Holy, the counselor breathed, then stopped himself. The nurse's voice came low, curious. How's he doing that if the dog was trained by state handlers? Earl's smile was faint and private. Dogs remember who taught them to trust their own noses. Memory lives where food never reaches. The sergeant looked from the animal to the man, and a small thing in her face broke open. Why are you here, Mr. Whitaker? Clerical delay, Earl said. He kept it brief. Dignity prefers a short version. Kepley barked out a laugh like a door slammed wrong. Clerical, my officer, the sergeant said without raising her voice. The word carried enough gravity to set a cup on. She faced Earl again. Can you demonstrate handler verification for my report? Earl nodded. He didn't touch Stark. He didn't clip the leash where every nerve in him wanted to. He used the smallest gestures, thumb and forefinger, a shoulder tilt, and let the dog come to heel, back away, do a quiet circle, lie down, look away, look back. The greenhouse's wet light washed everything clean. When he finished, men who didn't clap for religion clapped for 10 seconds for a truth they could see. The sergeant spoke into her radio. The words were dull, bureaucratic syllables, but the tone was new metal. Bring Lieutenant Rocha to Greenhouse Corridor 3 and call the warden's office. We have a handler identity conflict and potential procedural review. Kepley opened his mouth again. Nothing useful came out. Because it's hard to argue with a dog who chooses. The review didn't happen in a wood-paneled room where men use words like henceforth. It happened in the kennel run behind the vocational workshop, where the concrete sloped to drains, and the chain link sang when the wind tried the fence to see if it still held. Lieutenant Russia arrived, a woman whose stoic face could have been carved off a courthouse. The warden sent an assistant with a tablet, and the kind of smile that says he thinks policy is a thing you quote, not a thing that keeps men breathing. Kepley stood rigid, feet too wide, hands too tight. Stark leaned against Earl's thigh like a child at a parade. A half ring of officers stood back, trying at neutrality and failing. Run the verification, Rocha said. Kepley took the leash, barked the state commands in rapid fire. Stark did them, because loyalty can be broad. But every third command the dog's eyes darted to Earl as if checking if the world still made sense. Now you, Rocha said to Earl. Earl didn't touch the leash. He set a distance of 2 paces, hands open. Stark, he said gently, and then in a voice that held 100 tinny radios and 100 long nights, he offered a sequence only 2 beings on Earth knew. No theatrics. No show. A soft, specific dance. Heel, wait, sweep the search, mark the alert with a sit. He even gave the old handler's game at the end, dropped the tennis ball and asked the impossible. Leave it. Stark left the ball. The assistant stylist paused in midair a hair longer than professionalism permits. Rocha looked at Kepley, then at Earl, then back at the dog, who was watching Earl breathe. Officer Kepley, Rocha said, why did you give an attack command at intake on a compliant subject? Kepley's jaw pushed forward like he could hold the line with bone alone. Presence control, he said. Deterrence. He wasn't compliant. He was mouthy. Report says he was kneeling, Rocha said. Attitude, Kepley said. Your words were you people, the nurse offered from where she'd come to watch, the way good people show up when truth needs witnesses. I heard it. It's nothing. Kepley snapped. Just talk. Earl didn't add a word. He didn't need to. The run smelled like disinfectant and judgment, and some scents linger longer than cologne. Rocha's voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. Officer, turn in your badge and duty weapon pending investigation. Effective immediately, you are reassigned to administrative leave. Stark is also removed from your charge until this is resolved. Kepley's face twisted. You're taking the Mutt side over mine? The Mutt, Rocha said, a flint edge to the syllables, serve this state with more honor than any of us can put on paper. He looked around for allies and found none. He tried one more flight of anger. This is reverse discrimination. Enough, Rocha said, and the word cut through the chain link's hum. This isn't politics, it's competence and conduct. The assistant stepped forward, voice bureaucratic. Mr. Whitaker, our records confirm your prior service. We apologize for the intake error. The judge has already transmitted the corrected order. You're being released this afternoon. Earl nodded. Thank you. He looked at Stark, and the animal made that tiny thump at the tip of his tail that only certain people are allowed to see. What about the dog? One of the officers asked, a quiet man who had watched the whole scene with the same stillness you see on men at funerals. Stark will be temporarily placed with the training unit, Rocha said. She shifted her gaze. Mr. Whitaker, would you consider consulting on a retrain, short term? Earl's eyes warmed. If I can help the team, yes, under one condition. Rocha lifted a brow. Name it. We fixed what made this morning possible, Earl said. He didn't point at Kepley. He pointed at the tired moth's broken hinges nothing thinks to oil. How we teach, how we supervise, how we talk when we think no one is keeping a ledger. The warden's assistant cleared his throat. I can schedule a policy review. Not a meeting, Earl said. A standard and a habit and a mirror. Every shift. Rocha held his gaze a long moment, then nodded. We'll start today. I want a full after-action cultural competency refreshers and handler evaluation by outside auditors. She turned to Kepley. You will not return to handling. Maybe not to duty. For the first time that day, the guard looked smaller than his uniform. On the way out, past the greenhouse where tomatoes climbed their twine like men climbing rumors, Earl paused. He knelt, not because anyone asked, not because kneeling made a good picture, but because it put him level with the animal who had remembered him without asking for proof. He laid his palm over Stark's ribcage and felt the steady drum of a heart that had found its song again. Good boy, he said softly. I never forgot you either. Nobody clapped then. Some moments don't want applause. They want silence to stretch like a blessing until it covers everything that was raw a few minutes before. Let me tell you the part folks keep getting wrong when they pass this story along in the chow line or to their cousins over Sunday spaghetti. They'll say a dog embarrassed a man, or a man beat a system, or a policy got rewritten because somebody finally brought a clipboard to a kennel. What happened was simpler and heavier. Respect doesn't bark when you shout. Respect doesn't come with a badge, though a badge can carry it. Respect is a habit stitched into the quiet parts of a day. The way you speak to a person whose name you haven't bothered to learn, the way you hold the leash on a creature who'd follow you into fire if you asked right. It's what you do when you believe no one is making a record. That's the test that counts. A racist guard tried to write a lesson in another man's skin. He used a tool meant for rescue as an instrument of theater. But memory is a deeper ledger than malice. A dog remembered the hand that taught patience and the whistle that meant trust, and that remembrance pulled the curtain on the whole operation. The shame wasn't what fixed it. The seeing did. When the right eyes watched, steady, unafraid, unwilling to lie to themselves, justice got to work like a tired mechanic who still knows where the wrench ought to fit. As for Earl, he walked out the gate that afternoon with a paper that said mistake and a future that said repair. He didn't sue the world for the hour it took from him. He spent the hour he had next helping them build a better one. That's how some men keep score. And the guard? Maybe he learned. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he didn't. Not my job to script his repentance. My job, sitting here with a voice built for porches and low light, is to tell you what holds. Titles peel. Anger burns clean through its own fuel. But dignity, once taught, once practiced, has a way of teaching back. Sometimes it sits at heel. Sometimes it stands beside you when the dock turns cruel. Sometimes it looks you in the eye and refuses to harm the man you intended to hurt. Respect doesn't come from titles. It comes from how you treat people when you think no one's watching. And that, son, was the moment justice began.